Hello, my name is Jerome Page, and thank you for joining us for the 1960s Project. This is our 12th Facebook Live for the 1960s Project. While we're waiting for folks to join, let me describe the project. What we've been doing is recalling, remembering, and reflecting. We're recalling, remembering, and reflecting of those who were in high school in the 1960s, except for one show. We had a show where we had 3 guests who were in elementary school in the 1960s. But except for that show, all the guests have been in high school in the 1960s. So they could have started high school in the late 50s and finished in the 60s, or started in the late 60s and ended in and finished in the 70s. Our theme is tiny thoughts and large memories. And these are tiny thoughts and large memories from the lives of the 1960s high school students. We have 2 guests today. We have a guest interviewer and a guest blogger. Our guest interviewer graduated from college in 1967, and our guest blogger graduated in 1969. More on my guests in a few minutes. 1969, 51 years ago. What was on our minds then? Well, one thing that was on our minds was peace and love. Jimi Hendrix, in August of 2019, headlined the Woodstock Festival. At Woodstock, over 350,000 rock and roll fans converged on a farm in Massachusetts to spend several days there enjoying the company of each other. In addition to Jimi Hendrix, there was Crosby, Still and Nash and Young. There was also the group The Who. In 1969, civil rights were on our minds. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act was passed, which became effective in 1969. And that prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, or sex. This was a follow-up to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which expanded voting rights for Americans. One of the reasons that the Fair Housing Act of 1968 passed so quickly was because it followed on the heels of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Peace and love was on our minds. Civil rights was on our minds. Music was on our minds. On the Motown label, Stevie Wonder released My Cherie Amour. Every time I hear that, my little bit of French comes back, but I won't try that here on the broadcast. But that was 51 years ago. In October of this year, 2020, Stevie Wonder released a go-go album, a go-go record. Imagine that. If you're from DC, you know that go-go is the official music of the city. And there's a group that's struggling to make sure go-go thrives. And we don't want to mute the music. We want to keep the music alive. Now think about this. For years, the DC Go-Go Band sampled Stevie Wonder. Now Stevie Wonder is singing go-go. So if you haven't had a chance, you might want to check it out online to check out the release. And the title of his go-go release is Can't Put It in the Hands of Fate. And that carries on Stevie's tradition of protest and action and agency of Black people. Our guest interviewer today is Linda Williams. And she will introduce our guest blogger. She's also been one of our interviewees. And you can check out her interview and her blog on the website. Linda, welcome. I'm looking forward to the interview.
Good evening, Jerome. And we're looking forward to Louis Hicks, who will be sharing with us his narrative. If you haven't read his narrative, I would invite you to do so. And so, Lewis, are you here?
Yes, I am, Linda.
And so, as I said to our audience, if they haven't read your narrative, I invite them to do so. It's an interesting narrative, but we're going to pretend they haven't read it yet.
Okay.
And you're going to share with us a lot about you so that when we finish the conversation, we will really know you. And so start from the beginning. You know, where did you grow up? Where did you go to elementary school? Talk about your neighborhood. And so begin that conversation there.
Okay. One of the things I love talking about is growing up in the Austin Housing Authority's Rosewood projects. And of course, everybody in Austin referred to the projects, either the new or the old projects, because we had two sets for the African Americans. One was for the newer ones were built after the Rosewood projects. And I think I heard that the Rosewood projects were ones that have historic designation as being one of the earlier ones that was built for housing when there was a move to build government housing as low income housing across the country. I grew up and had middle class values. And one of my neighbors, I recall him telling me that we were lower class, and I grew up with middle class values because my dad listened to classical music. I had season tickets as a kid to go to the Austin Municipal Auditorium, or at that time it was the Coliseum. In later years, it was the Municipal Auditorium, where we boarded Greyhound buses. We got out of school at 2:30 or earlier than regular school dismissal to go. And it was a really special thing because we were able to enjoy classical music. And I believe that's why even today, I have a very eclectic range of music that I listen to, from country and Western to international to Mexican music, Latin music, as well as R&B music.
Really? So when you were younger at your elementary school, at one point, talk about that too. You went to junior high school. You were playing an instrument.
That's right. Um, I didn't choose to play the clarinet because that was the instrument of choice. I was handed down my musical instrument because there was a clarinet around the house, and my sister had decided to pick up the bass clarinet and play that in Keeling Junior High School in the marching band. And because our junior high school, Mr. Patterson, came to our elementary schools to recruit students and teach them so that he had incoming people to join the band, I joined the band. I'm not sure immediately in the seventh grade or in the eighth and ninth grade, but I know that by the eighth grade, I was playing clarinet in the marching band. So he started to instruct us in the simple rudiments of playing an instrument in sixth grade. Once I graduated and went to junior high school, Keeling Junior High School, I started playing in the marching band.
In the marching band. And so
Yes.
you played the clarinet all the way through. I think in your narrative, didn't you, something happened and you changed instruments or something?
That's correct. I changed once I reached, I believe, my junior year in L.C. Anderson High School. There were too many woodwind instruments in the band, and so they were dominated. And so the band director decided that we needed more brass, and so I was all game. And so out of the students, I just remember four people volunteering: myself, Eleanor Warren, um, Margaret Lindsay, and I'm forgetting the other person, but it was me and one other person. So we composed the French horn section. So I don't know how in the world I chose to play a French horn, but it seemed to be pretty easily. I was able to change from a reed instrument and play a brass instrument, and it was a lot of fun. I love the sound of the French horn.
Do you get private lessons for the French horn or just through the school?
No, actually, I played just by the band instructor. He taught us. I guess we would have private lessons after band practice, or he would have one person instruct us. I also remember there was a fierce competition for first chair, and I always tried to beat Eleanor Warren and sit in first chair, but she was a pretty good horn player, so I never could achieve pushing her out of the first chair seat.
So you were competitive in that sense. So this is junior high and high school you're playing the French horn, or just in high school?
Only in high school. I played the clarinet from 7th grade all the way through to my junior year, which was the 11th grade.
Elementary and junior high school. Talk about you grew up in Texas.
That's correct.
Talk about Texas. Say we don't know about Texas, where your neighborhood. Tell us about that. Your elementary, your junior high school. Who were the people? Begin to talk about your family. Where are you in the family?
I'm the third child in a family, and like most African Americans that I've heard, we were a very close-knit neighborhood. My family members, I come from a family of a grandmother who had 13 siblings. Her sister had 13 children. And up and down our street, by luck would have it, or by a plan, my relatives located up and down the street. I believe there were about 6 of my relatives living on Poquito. We used to call it Paquita because of Black dialect or lack of knowing Spanish. And my grandmother lived on the street that was perpendicular to my street, but her at least 4 sisters and one of her brothers lived on the street, and then my grandmother lived around the corner. So we would always gather up and down the neighborhood. So if there was any babysitting during the time that my parents would go out to dances at the Doris Miller Auditorium, which was within the neighborhood, only about 4 or 5 blocks. That was one of the places, the Rosewood Park, where I learned to swim at a very early age. I would take swimming lessons at 7 in the morning. But our neighborhood was so situated in such a way that I could walk to my elementary school, Blackshear Elementary, Keeling Junior High, and L.C. Anderson High School, all within a 30-minute radius walk to school.
Tell us about the school. Segregated, integrated?
Yes. All our schools up until recently were integrated, and I just happened to see an article that was posted on Facebook that was an interview on radio, KUT radio, that talks about the systematic way that Blacks were kept separate, as well as the whites and the Latinos. All the schools were segregated so that you had Latinos living in our neighborhood. I remember just the street that ran parallel to our street, there was a Latino family, but they didn't attend Blackshear Elementary School, even though they were within walking distance. They went to a separate Latin American school. There were no white people living in our neighborhood. We live in close proximity to Latin families. And even though our cultures, because of Texas, we had a blending of cultures. Everybody ate Mexican food. It was a part of some of the things that I remember my family's relatives coming from California. They would always just die to get tamales to take back with them, or people in our family would learn to cook Mexican food. But our neighborhoods were pretty segregated, both going around, even riding the bus or going downtown. We were segregated. even to, like, I've heard cases about Woody's where people could not try on clothes or hats, African Americans. We had a family-owned business, which was like a very high-class business in Austin, Texas. Scarborough's department store on Congress Avenue was a place that we could go in, but we could not try on clothes.
Oh, yeah, during that time. So your schools were segregated, Black, African American,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Teachers were African American also all the way through junior high and high school?
It was segregated all the way through my, I believe, sophomore or junior year. That was the first time that I had ever been taught by a white teacher. So I had a Mr. Monroe. I still remember him to this day. Very nice man that taught me history. And ironically, I don't remember anything from my history classes, because I always felt that history was something that didn't relate to my life, because I couldn't relate history until I came to the East Coast and started working in a small museum in Alexandria, Virginia, where I worked as an intern to unpack or to pack up the items that were donated by George Washington. And since Mount Vernon was just down the road from Alexandria, Virginia, that I started to make connections and get a broader picture of what history was all about. But when I was studying history in high school, it was almost as if I was reading fairy tales, because there was no mention of African Americans, and I didn't really put it all together until I started running the George Washington Carver Museum in Austin as one of the first curators.
I can talk about that to us. But when you were in high school, somebody asked the question, do you still play the French horn?
No, I wish I would. I keep saying that I'm going to pick up my clarinet. Now, I never owned a French horn because it was always one of the school instruments. My sister, I think, may still have the clarinet at her house in Austin, but I keep saying that I'm going to start picking up the clarinet and doing that. With the time of COVID, this is the perfect opportunity, because I have a whole routine.
Yeah, it really is. And so at your high school, you were playing, you evolved to playing the French horn. Talk about the courses in your high school. What kind of person were you in high school? This is during the 60s. And so there were things that were going on outside of your high school. Did those things impact you, or were you aware of what was going on, outside of the high school? Talk about your dad, your family, your siblings.
Sure.
You have
Sure.
so much to share.
Yeah, one of the things I want to jump on is to talk about football games, because football is king in Texas. Everybody, it's almost like a rite of passage. You grow up playing football in the street. You're measured how well you do in football. That creates your status in the pecking order in your school. I could run pretty fast, and I was mediocre in playing football. So I always try to use my girth of my body, even though going to high school, I only weighed 135, but I was a big kid and kind of stocky growing up. So I always had a little heft with me. So I would always be on the front line playing. I see popped up on the screen maybe a picture of me when I was from my yearbook in 1969. But football was always one of the things that we kind of rallied around. We would have pep rallies where the band would play first thing in the morning, where we would, on Friday, the day of a game, we would have prep rallies. We would then get all psyched up. The football team would come in. We would have the cheerleaders. The band would play as part of the pep rally, first assembly in the morning. Then in the evening, we would go to the football games. And when I was growing up, Elsie Anderson was like the hub of our Black community. There were football heroes that lived in the projects across the street. They were well known. They were very athletic people.
Football heroes from your high school or
Yes.
professional football? Or from your high school? Okay.
And there were a few that went on to become national football and play in the NFL. I
Oh,
believe Night
really?
Train Lane is one of the ones that people remember more than anything. But there were guys that were very, very well, had very good athletic prowess to play. John Harvey was one of my classmates, and at the time of prior to entering UT, blacks were not allowed to play football. Like Julius Whittier, I see from another article that just appeared the other day, was one of the first blacks to play football at UT, and he entered in 1969. But marching band and Friday night was something that we always looked forward to.
So, when you were in high school, you had football that was going on. And so, what were the courses that you were taking in high school? Again, were you aware of what was going on outside of the school, or did that just take up all of your time and energy?
No, as Jerome mentioned in the very beginning, it was a time of the Beatles, Black Pride, and kind of um, um, I guess when people were becoming very conscious of their black identity, James Brown saying, "I'm black and I'm proud," afros. I remember my dad taking a medallion, and a friend had carved it, and it had kind of an Afrocentric um, face carved, and I had a poster of Huey Newton, and I remember him taking it down off the wall and it disappearing as well as that because I think he thought I was getting too radical, but I was not really that engaged or even aware because I thought high school was everything. The social activities, my friends that I ran around with, the fact that I was um, popular in high school, that I had lots of friends. My whole world revolved around the social life of high school. I took chemistry, I took geometry. I was really bad in math. And so I had to have a tutor. And thank God I had a tutor because I guess I'm a visual learner. That's probably why I ventured off into art. I didn't really comprehend geometry, algebra, or those things. It was just foreign to me. I just could not grasp the concepts. But all the other classes I pretty well handled, and English I enjoyed. I eventually learned to write, but I was not a very good writer and had to take remedial classes in college to learn to write. But I got by as a B student in high school.
I hear you. And so you talk about the fact as a younger person, you would look at a lot of TV in your narrative. You talk about your father. Tell us about that in terms of your, as you were growing up.
Oh yeah, my dad, my whole blog centers around the fact that my dad inspired me to go to college, and I thank him to this day for the fact that he always had this mantra: "Son, do one thing for me. If you don't do anything, get 1 year of college, and then you can quit." But it was also I grew up watching TV and hearing this propaganda on TV to get a good job, get a good education, go to college. So going to college was always kind of cemented in my mind, as well as Houston Tillotson College was an integral part of our community. It was only blocks away from my house. It was directly across the street from my elementary school, Blackshear Elementary. And so it was the fabric of our neighborhood. We would go to step shows. We would slide down the fire escape as a slide that went from the third floor to the ground floor. That was one of our activities. We would roller skate on the tennis courts. And we, whenever the beauty queen was chosen for their homecoming, all the people in the neighborhood would attend those things as part of the culture. They would have parades from the school through the neighborhoods through East Austin that ran from Houston Tillotson down our main street, Rosewood Avenue, and back to the college. But Houston Tillotson was an integral part of our community and inspired me. I thought going to college was all about joining fraternity. I remember working at IBM one summer right before I went to college, and I was working with engineering intern from UT. And one of my biggest anxieties was what fraternity was I going to join, and not realizing that there were segregated fraternities. Once I got to college, I didn't realize that I was not going to be able to join the fraternity that the white intern at my IBM was advising me that I should just join any fraternity. So I didn't realize it was segregated.
You talked about earlier in high school that the history course, you just couldn't relate to it, in terms of the information that was shared with you. But at what point did I think you mentioned it, but come back and talk to us again. What point did history come real for you?
When I was hired,
intellectually.
When I was hired right out of college, I got 2 degrees. One was first in psychology. I was not counseled that I would could be a psychologist after a 4-year baccalaureate degree. And so I did substitute teaching, went back, got to get a teacher's certificate, stayed in class one day because it was so boring. I had taken a pass-fail art class and did really well. And I had drawn when I was in 9th grade on up, and I've always had an interest in art. So I thought after 125 hours of class coursework, I would be able to just easily pick up a degree in art with under a year or a year. But it took 4 years, and I finally got out. But before getting out, I had to concentrate on something. So I concentrated on advertising. I was working in a Austin Public Library as a desk assistant, but I needed to prepare a portfolio to go to New York and get an advertising job. But prior to that, a museum opened up. That was my former branch library, and that's where I got my first job as a curator of an African American museum. And that was for the first time where it became real to me, things about my history. I was finding out the history of my community and why schools were named, funeral homes were named, streets were named, neighborhoods were named.
Of the African American Museum, what kind of background did you need to do that? Or did you have a mentor? Talk about how that,
That's
interesting.
Part. That is the funniest part, because due to segregation, we were not allowed to go into museums. I didn't have a clue about what one did to run a museum, let alone what happens in a museum. So I was hired in May right out of school. I spent 3 months training at the Austin History Center. And supposedly during that time, they were to teach me the things that I needed to do in order to open up our first exhibition in September. We were on a simultaneous track where the museum was being renovated, or the old library building was being renovated because a brand new library was built directly adjacent. So as it came online and it was scheduled to open in September, I was tasked with the deal of being able to create an exhibition during that 3 months. Luckily for me, I had the mentor of the director of the Austin Public Library, David Earl Hote, and Bowden, the assistant director of the libraries, who was an ex-Marine, and Clifton Griffin, the branch librarian, and we would meet each week to discuss the exhibition and the support of how we were going to create an exhibition. Luckily for us, the Delta Sigma Theta sorority had donated a tabletop exhibit to the museum, and the photographs and the things that they had assembled created the basis for our first exhibition. And being a visual learner, my professor in the student advertising class, the last class I took before I graduated, taught us to think through problems. And so I had a problem, had to figure out how to create an exhibition from nothing. And I created it because I wanted to know what was the history of Austin. How did Black people get to Austin?
Mm-hmm. And so from that is how you created your exhibition. So I guess you looked at things in that similar manner,
Yes,
from a learning experience. What can I learn about this?
that's correct. And that was the motivating factor for the majority of the exhibitions that were created while I was there at the Carver Museum for more than 8 years. I always was interested in learning and creating exhibitions to talk about Blacks in the military or our foodways in Austin. Juneteenth was something that I knew about, and our family celebrated on our family farm in Maynard, Texas. But I always thought that Juneteenth was something that we really shouldn't be celebrating because we're Americans. We should celebrate the 4th of July. So why are we celebrating Juneteenth? And it was only until I was at the museum that I understood the significance that we were left out of the history books. The news that Black people were emancipated reached Texas 2.5 years later, and it was not really with the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation that Black people in Texas were freed.
Yeah, yeah. From an African American history, how are you able to develop your research or get that information? You said you were trained in the course, but to develop those, to be a curator at an exhibit or just to bring in the African American history perspective. Talk about the research that's done. Are you working in collaboration with people, or how is that done?
Part of it was a combination of things. There was a board of directors or an ad hoc committee of interested citizens in Austin that basically lobbied the city to create the museum. They were composed of historians, lay historians, as well as members of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, as well as other people, the Passon Historical Society that had done significant work. Ada Simon was a lay historian that wrote books about her memories of a childhood friend, and she had a series of books that served as the basis for providing a lot of information. I also had to find friends in places to supplement my education. So, being a product of UT, I talked to John Warfield with the African American Studies at UT, also a folklorist at UT. And those people talked about historical aspects of Austin history, and they helped to supplement our programming as well as serve on our board. Clay Shorkey and Ruth McElroy in the School of Social Work became our mentors in the board, on our board of directors. They help propel our museum forward to help develop a self-study to expand the museum. So during the time that we were there, we were able to galvanize the people in Austin to create a conceptual plan for the future growth beyond the one-room museum to expand it to the museum facility that you see today, where we have a larger physical plan of a museum that's expanded beyond the one-room museum and created a larger museum with galleries and performance space and a gift shop.
And so this is in Texas. All of
Yes.
this is in Texas. And how did you get to the East Coast? How did you get here?
I was recruited by Floyd Coleman, who was a head of the art department at Howard University. We brought him in. I was working with an organization, the Black Arts Alliance, to present a statewide juried art exhibition that brought in professional artists to a juried exhibition. And my colleague, Valerie Cassell, who's now at the Richmond Fine Arts Museum, she served as the curator for the exhibition. The exhibition was housed in our space. Dr. Coleman came to Austin, saw the exhibition. He was blown away by what we had done in that small space to bring together. And he thought that that was a perfect opportunity to recruit both of us to come to Howard. And the timing was perfect because it just so happened that my boss thought that I was a bad manager and put me on probation. And as a result of that, I finagled my way to say, since I'm such a bad manager, why don't you allow me, through the support of the city, to go to the Getty Museum Management Institute at Berkeley, California, to hone my skills. All the while, I had already concocted a plan where I was taking Dr. Coleman up on the idea of coming to Howard because I wanted to live on the East Coast. So simultaneously, I got things in place so that in the fall I can enroll in Howard, go to California for 6 weeks, studied at Berkeley for the Museum Management Institute, come back in August, quit my job, and then take off and go to Howard to start my graduate studies in African art history.
Okay, so when you were at Berkeley, you were taking the course. Talk to us about the course in terms of its preparation, and then going to Howard and its preparation.
The Museum Management Institute was a institute by the American Association of Museums, and it was facilitated by the Getty Trust, I believe. So it was basically a way of training museum professionals so that they received all the things from writing labels to administrative duties, raising funds, and every aspect of museum administration. And it was a very intense course, to the point that we had classes starting at 9 o'clock in the morning, as well as study sessions that went into the evening, Monday through Friday, for 6 weeks. And fortunately for me, it was time that I took advantage of seeing some of the city, as well as going to Lake Tahoe with some of our friends. From the thing, we took a weekend trip. We also created a wine club so that we sampled California wines every night at dinner. And ironically, our closing dinner was at the president of Berkeley University's house, who later, after I started working at the Smithsonian, became the secretary at the Smithsonian. And we just ironically had dinner at his house as a student in the program.
You then, how old were you during that time?
I'm sorry.
How old were you? Huh?
How old was I?
Yeah.
I think I was probably about 35 when I left, because I worked for 8 years at in Austin after I graduated, and then came to DC in 1988.
All right. And so then from there, you said you went to Howard.
That's right.
And taking graduate courses in there. Talk about that with us in terms of its preparation.
Sure. I took African art history classes, and I did a multidisciplinary study of looking at voodoo. My proposal to come to Howard was first started by my travels in Mexico, because a friend of mine brought back a little African stereotypical figure of an African person in blackface and white lips and a grass skirt and a wire body, on kind of made as an art object. And I was fascinated to understand why a black object was found in Mexico, because all the people that I had ever seen were my complexion or lighter as Mexican Americans. So I was just kind of stunned to see that. So I wrote my introductory essay as part of my entrance to get considered for the program, to investigate this as my thesis topic. Unfortunately, I studied French and not Spanish, so it was going to be difficult to do that. So my professor proposed that I look at voodoo, because I grew up in a Southern Baptist background where my uncle was a proselytizer on the street corner. So religion played very strongly in my background. So in order to satisfy that, I pursued looking at how voodoo was taken to Haiti. And in order to do that, I had to understand history, symbolism, psychology, slavery, religion, and how all those come together in order to bring a religion, and how it was hidden on top of Catholic icons.
And when you were finding all this information and putting this information together, I mean, what were your thoughts at that time, if you can reflect?
Oh yeah, one of the things that I remembered stood out was, now I finally understand why Black women shout in church. It was all part of spirit possession, but it had a stronger link than I didn't really understand how all of this kind of went down through the ages, and how our religion had origins in Africa, and the fact that um, people in Africa had their own religion prior to coming to the States or to the Americas, and that they were proselytized to believe in the Christian God, and how they maintain aspects of their religious cosmology to have belief systems that blended together and suited their purposes in the New World.
So I'm sure, I mean, my gosh. So I mean, goodness. And so you're at Howard. Howard has a wealth of information. You know, for those who've attended Howard and are familiar with their library, talk about that in terms of how did you embrace all of that new knowledge, or expanding your whole intellectual growth about African American history.
I was very fortunate, because one of the first things that I did was work study, and I worked in the Howard Art Gallery, because that was part of my work study, and also bringing my experience as a museum administrator, I was able to do that. But also people from AfriCobra. Jeff Donaldson was also the head of the fine arts department after that, and Jeff Donaldson is part of AfriCobra. So I was surrounded by a community of artists that were both internationally and nationally recognized, as well as having my mentor, Floyd Coleman, guiding me through. And he was a well-recognized artist in his own right that had done work looking at Diego Rivera's murals in Mexico. And I had a professor guiding my thesis study, a Ghanaian, Dr. Ofori Ansa. And Dr. Ansa took us through rudimentary steps of writing in all the countries in Africa on a map. And I thought, I'm in graduate school. Why should I do something as simple as an elementary exercise? But it stunned me to make me realize that I probably could only write in 8 countries out of this whole entire continent. And of course, we know most of them, like South Africa, the most prominent ones, but there were lots and lots of countries that I couldn't fill in. So he guided us and shepherded us through our studies and helped us to understand the broader picture of our miseducation as well as our education and the importance of understanding our African culture and how it related to African American culture.
Community in Martha's Vineyard and its history.
Would you repeat the question again?
It says there's a question about apparently one of our listeners would like you to share your thoughts on the African American community in Martha's Vineyard. And
oh yeah, I'd love to do that.
It's history.
Ludwig Gaines, one of my colleagues from Alexandria, was a city council person and now teaches law at Howard Law School. And I often see him up there. He and I are both connected to Howard. And
okay.
I have a colleague with the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And the African American presence on Martha's Vineyard is very fascinating because both there were people that owned homes there as well as worked in the houses. For those people that are not familiar, there's a large contingent of African Americans that go to Martha's Vineyard each year to recreate, but it's also a place of intellectual stimulation. We have lectures, artists coming, jazz performances, as well as a number of things, but it has a very, very strong historical background. And there even Robert Hayden conducts an African-American historic tour of Martha's Vineyard through the local chapter of the Association for the Study of African-American Life and History.
So from Howard, I saw in your narrative, you were also at the Anacostia Museum. You were a curator. Is that later? I'm trying to stay within your time frame.
Sure. It was after college. I had just graduated again, graduating with a master's in African art history. Not quite sure how that was going to apply, but I had been in touch with a buddy of mine, Stephen Newsom, who had moved from Chicago to run the Banneker Douglas Museum in Annapolis, Maryland. And I got in touch with Stephen and wanted to see if I could get a job with him. So you know how that works. At the time prior to the internet, networking was very strong thing where you could circulate your resume with your friends and make connections by networking. So I talked to Stephen, and just so happens that he was being hired to run the Anacostia Museum. And at that time, they needed additional staff. He hired me to be a special assistant to the director. And in doing that, I essentially ran a museum within the museum and wore several hats. I was the gift shop coordinator. I was the traveling exhibitions coordinator. I was a supervisor of PR. I was the community gallery coordinator, which took an exhibition from start to finish to counseling people, talking about what their ideas were, working with the graphic artist in our design department to design the layout of the room in a one-room gallery, as well as also creating our special events for Juneteenth, as well as Clinton's inauguration on the National Mall, where I coordinated the activities to create two festival events, one on the mall and one on the grounds of Anacostia, as well as creating an Africa Fest, which was a international presentation of African artists performing on the grounds of Anacostia Museum.
You're developing these things, creating these things. What are the things that go through in your mind? You know, what goes through your mind as you're thinking of these things that you're doing?
I guess more than anything, it's I want to see things that I'm kind of fascinated by, because I've always, since studying with Dr. Ansa, looking at our African culture. And then one of the first exhibitions that we did at Anacostia was the Black Mosaic, looking at communities of the African diaspora that spread through the Caribbean to Latin America, and the fact that those individuals that are considered, if they look like me and my color, coming from a Latin country or Francophone country, they considered themselves either French or Spanish before they considered themselves African Americans, but people looking at them thought of them. So those kinds of things and those explorations opened us up to a variety of things where we were very fortunate that we had a very, very dynamic team of people that were just inspirational, not from our director to the assistant director, Sharon Rankins, who had been there for years, as well as people in our design department, our research department, our education department, all of us coming together, gelled ideas to create the programs and events that happen.
For those of us who are listening, where is that African, the museum located?
The Anacostia Museum is located in Southeast Washington in the Anacostia neighborhood. It's located on one of the higher points in the city. It's situated, tucked into a neighborhood, and it was created as a result of an experiment that S. Dillon Ripley, one of the secretaries for the Smithsonian, wanted to get more African Americans engaged in the museum experience. So they started out in a converted theater on MLK Avenue in Southeast Washington. And then later, after that was no longer large enough, they moved and built another museum at Fort Place, Southeast, in Southeast Washington.
Wow. So we can go visit the museum now if we wanted to. I'm sure with COVID, you know. Have you been to the African American Museum downtown?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that was one of the things. When I was in Austin, that was one of my dream jobs. I always had aspirations of working there at the museum. And so I had always kind of had tunnel vision of that's where I was eventually going to end up and retire. I applied for a job, but didn't quite get there through a set of unfortunate circumstances. Lonnie Bunch, who is now the secretary for the Smithsonian, I knew him personally because he worked at the American History Museum before going to Chicago, then being hired there. And I told him of the difficulty of just getting through the federal system to get your application even seen by the staff. And I told him about that. And he made a call, and I got a telephone interview with the curators. But unfortunately, it was prior to one of the shutdowns of the federal government. And as a result of that, I didn't get to go any further in the process. But during that, I was able to get hired as the director at the Alexandria Black History Museum.
Okay, so is that I'm not familiar with that one. Is it a large museum or talk to us?
No, it's a relatively small museum, and I saw lots of parallels to the story of how the Alexandria Black History Museum got started, similar to the Carver Museum, because it was started through the result of local citizens so petitioning the city to build an African American museum. And the anchor structure of the museum is an old library building, believe it or not, that was started as a result of a sit-down demonstration in 1939. That was created, and it was added on to and created a museum space. It also has three components. It has the museum, the Watson Reading Room, which was my office, and then a 9-acre African American Heritage Park right off the intersection of Duke and Holland Street, close to the Whole Foods.
So it's worth a visit. My gosh, it's worth a visit then. I mean, once COVID is over. I mean, so
Yes.
we have places that we can go just to see. Okay.
That's correct.
So what are you doing now? What are you doing now? I mean, we could talk forever because it's such an
Right
interesting
now,
conversation.
to fill my time, and one of the things that helped me transition for a second retirement is working with the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. I've worked on their luncheon committee where we seat 1,000 people for a Black History luncheon in February. Because of COVID, we've had to go virtual, and now we are working toward creating a African American festival in February that begins at the beginning of February, and we look at foodways. We'll also have a discussion with Bill Gates and Evelyn Hickenbotham, the president of SALA, talking about the Black family. And then at the end of the month, we'll talk about, have a discussion with Black scuba divers who have done dives for slave ships.
Oh, okay, my gosh. So you are still busy, really.
Yes. And it helps.
So
It helps hone my skills to do Zoom meetings as well as learn to do things virtually and plan and conceptualize things as museums have to do now. How do you continue to cultivate your audiences through a virtual platform?
Okay, I see there's Jerome, but hold on, Jerome. There's another thing I would like to ask Lewis, okay? So here you are now, you've had a full career, you've learned so much. What's your message to the viewers who are looking and who are listening to you? You know, what do you have to say to them? You have so much information that you've shared.
One thing I'd like to always make people, young people, think about, don't necessarily always think college is the path to end all. Think about the trades. Think about getting a skill. I was always open to learning. So learn where you can. Read. I love reading. I love movies. But always be open to learning something and opportunities. Your pathway that you're pursuing and going down may not always lead to where you think that you're going to go, but you'll have a rich experience all along the way as long as you're open.
Thank you very much, Linda and Lewis.
Thank you.
I learned a lot. Every time I talk to you, Lewis, I learned a bit more.
All right.
You spoke French and played the French horn.
And you're such an interesting person. Okay, you've had a full career, and so it was just an honor to listen to you. And if those of us those who haven't read your narrative, I would encourage you to do so because it's an interesting narrative.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you again, Linda. Thank you again, Lewis. And thank everyone for listening, either on YouTube or Facebook. This was our 12th broadcast of the 1960s Project. As Linda indicated, I invite you to read the posts and provide, or the blogs, and provide comments. Also, I invite you to share your tiny thoughts and large memories. If you'd like to be a guest, you can either participate by writing a blog, or you can be a video guest. And join us next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll have more to share. Thank you very much, and good night.